is when this house was built in 1867, it was started in the spring of 67, but it wasn't completed by the time winter came. So they had to find some kind of material to cover up this striker's room, and they used the canvas tents that were up for the military. So when you do go in the room, and you take a look in that left-hand side room for the striker's room, you'll see the canvas that is still there. And that canvas is 150 years old. So the military made something that lasted for a while. Hallway goes into the dining room, remembering that there was a wall separating the spaces. The wall is now long gone. The floor is pretty much original, although you'll find some linoleum back in this kitchen, and if you notice where the Civil War items are, it's the same linoleum that is on the top of the table. So we were wondering, the table came originally from the hospital and from the school, if they had just this big batch of linoleum sometimes in the 20s when they redid everything all over. Back is the kitchen. Behind the kitchen there is a storage room. Pretty interesting. When they had a garden that was located over to the east, and they had a pump, steam pump, that worked water from the Sun River, and they brought it up to irrigate the garden. They also used it for household uses. Most of the food that they ate was shipped by steamship, or steamboat, coming to Fort Benton, coming across overland by wagon, pulled by mule or by oxen. And that's also how they got some of their additional things for hinges and doorknobs and glass. And did you notice in the house there are a couple of the original pieces of the wavy glass that are still there? That's absolutely beautiful. On this side, when you go in, or if you have already been in, this hallway is open and exposed. You can see all the adobe brick, and then the lath work that was worked and used to construct the house. This area should be closed off. I'm not sure if it is. The adobe brick is really interesting. Each one of those adobe squares are 4 by 8 by 12 inch. And they were created out of the Adobe Creek, which is off in this direction, goes right into the Sun River. So the mud to make the Adobe Creek was made right there and then brought up and constructed here. From the garden, they had produce the first fall after they planted the garden, and used the produce, of course, women doing the cooking, and right along with the strikers doing the household work as well. Any questions?
What women were here?
The wives. This was the officers' quarters. Their wives came here. There was an officer's wife, Mrs. Rowe, and officers could be bumped depending upon their rank. So Mrs. Rowe and her husband and family lived in one of these officers' quarters. And she wrote about some fellow who's coming, some colonel or captain or somebody who was a higher level than what her husband was. And he got moved to Fort Ellis. Huh? And she was just so happy that she was going to be able to stay here. So they fixed up the quarters, they made it all nice and fancy, and he came back and said, nope, I want it now. So he moved in. So there was that elitist bumping kind of situation that would take place.
And the women did the cooking?
The women did the cooking unless the striker did the cooking. And the women would often have tea parties and sit out and do their knitting and needle pointing and playing their musical instruments. There used to be a theater here someplace, and they had dances. So they would get all dressed up and go for their dances. So of course, the enlisted men didn't go, but the officers did, and the officers' wives did. The enlisted men would take their paycheck and go to town and do what enlisted men do when they get their paycheck. That never changes. Any questions?
Did they hire locals?
Yes, they did. Thank you very much. There was a fairly large, 33 people that were civilian folks that worked for the Army. They did bakers. There was a fellow that came by the other day whose great-grandfather hunted and was a butcher. So he had a few stories to share. How interesting to have a family, a relative that came from being at the fort or a leftover from being at the fort. I've met a couple of them too. Pretty interesting.
They didn't hire local Indian people.
Well, the reason the fort was built in the first place was as a protective measure for the Mullan Road and for mining that was going on in Helena, and it was a safeguard for protection from the natives. In the fort, they were involved in 3 skirmishes, the Baker Massacre, I don't know if you're familiar with that, the Baker Massacre, and Big Hole, and Custer's. But when they made it to Custer, they got down there too late, and they wound up doing body detail. But the place was built for the purpose of protection of the settlers in the area. I can't talk a whole half an hour on this. Elegant dinners. Oh, this is pretty cool. At one point in time, after the clapboard was added, the government got a big deal on paint, red paint.
Huh?
And you can see actually still some of the red paint on the base of the striker's room. Used to be sidewalks going up and down, a wooden sidewalk along the colonnade of the trees. Yeah. And I said there were 6 of these houses, which there were. There were 2 more on this side, 1 more on the other side of the commanding officers, and then 3 more down on that side. So this was quite a big, expansive area of buildings and people and activity going on. They had school, they had a library, a theater. Any questions?